Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. Kalani and Asuelu videos where they go to therapy. Eli says, I'm really curious how you film these episodes. Well, so the longer comment just asks me how I actually make these episodes. In what sequence do I make them? And I think it is actually kind of important that y'all know how I do this. So when I have free time, I sit down and I record usually a batch of reaction videos. And right now, with Kalani and Asuelu, and also with Elizabeth and Andre, prior to the beginning of this most recent 90 Day Fiancé season, I recorded reaction videos, going back in time because they were in previous seasons. But because of scheduling the videos now are being released, even though I recorded them probably a couple months ago. And I've already recorded the reaction videos to Kalani and Asuelu and Elizabeth and Andre whenever I sit. So on Sunday night, when 90 Day Fiancé comes out, I sit down and I watch the show and I react to every couple. And then depending on what happens, I might not include some couples, like with Tiffany and Ronald, for example. There's not a lot for me to say, so I might react a little bit, but then I'll just scrap the whole thing because I'm like, if it's just a 1-minute episode, it's just not very interesting. So I have already reacted to Kalani and Andre up until this point, but I haven't released them yet because we're still releasing the episodes from before, if that makes any sense. For example, with Big Ed, those videos, I've already recorded a lot of them. And so as they come out, they will come out, the pod wife, she's in charge of scheduling everything. And so I think it's important that y'all know that because some episodes you might be watching and thinking, well, didn't he already say that? So things might be out of sequence is the thing. And we're doing our best. There's a lot of catching up to do, because like with this most recent season of 90 Day Fiancé, there were couples like Kalani and Asuelu and Elizabeth and Andre that I hadn't ever seen before. And so I had to go back to previous seasons and just watch those segments of the previous seasons and react to them. I hope that makes sense. All right. Jordan says to Kalani and Asuelu, so random to say, but I work as a PA in a hospital, and I have been using your therapy approach techniques when I run into difficult patient situations, and it's been super helpful, and I have experienced much better outcomes with my patients. You should teach a course for medical providers to approach and de-escalate difficult patient interactions. Well, maybe, Jordan, but you could just watch these videos and just pick up the tips that I put forth or listen to my podcast. Jacqueline, well, so the reason why I answer that way is because people will suggest sometimes that I, teach a course on this, or I do a seminar on this, or I do a series on this. And I would love to, honestly, but I have only so much time. And I'm also always acutely aware of how much time I have left on this planet. And every once in a while, I go through all the different deep dives that I want to go into, all the different projects I want to work on for this podcast and this YouTube channel. And I think I am not going to live long enough to get all these things done. There's just not enough hours left in the human life for me to achieve all that I want to, all the different topics, all the different things that people ask me to do. So when it comes to seminars and classes, I usually say, it's lower down on the priority list. It's something I want to do, but I don't think I'm ever going to get to it. We'll find out. Jacqueline says, these videos have helped me to be a better teacher, more differentiated when working with students, but especially when working with their parents. My mental health has improved a bit because of it. Well, thanks, Jacqueline, and good for you. Molly says, good old Molly says, what do you think of a therapist that says to a couple, you don't seem like a couple that would get divorced? Me and my ex went to 2 different therapists who said the same thing to us. You don't seem like a couple that would get divorced. And that was within the first 2 sessions. I think they meant it as a compliment, but for me, it was kind of invalidating. It just seemed like they were saying things weren't that bad, even though they were. We got divorced later, and it was for the best. Yeah, so whenever people report what happened with their therapist, I'm always a little I don't know what to say, because we'd have to talk to the therapist. I would have to be there, because when you're in therapy, it's very tense, especially couples therapy. There's a lot of tension in the air, especially in the first couple sessions. And so the therapist is doing their best. They're trying to help. And maybe their approach doesn't mesh well with you, or maybe they're trying to say something, but it wasn't really received in the way they're trying to say it. Maybe they're having a lot of countertransference. Things happen in therapy. And sometimes therapists make mistakes. And so if a therapist said, if I was observing a trainee and they said to a client, you don't seem like a couple that would get divorced, I probably would pull them aside after and say, you probably should avoid saying things like that. One, for the reason that you say, Molly, is that it can invalidate people. The message, even though I don't think the therapist meant it this way, could be, you don't seem like, things don't seem that bad. And usually when people are coming into therapy for couples therapy, things are that bad, at least to them. So I'm guessing there's another, if I was talking to a trainee, I would say, what was your point there? Usually with a therapist, their point is they're trying to bolster the couple's self-esteem. They're trying to say, you know what, you have a lot of strengths here, and you are able to work things out, or I see some of the love between the two of you. And then I would say to the trainee, just say that. Don't say something like, you don't seem like a couple that would get divorced, because that's not really what is in your heart anyway, and it might not be received well. It is something that I actually will train all my couples therapists, trainees to do, which is to instill hope, to tell the couple, look, we can work on this. I've seen worse couples and they've gotten better. That's something that I say, because most couples don't compare to the worst couples I've ever seen. And even the worst couples, meaning the most conflictual and the most undifferentiated, can get better and absolutely can improve over time. Might take a long time, but they absolutely can. And so instilling hope is important, because most people come into therapy, especially for couples therapy, with a lot of shame, a lot of stigma, and not a lot of hope. And so you want to provide that hope. But at the same time, you don't want to invalidate their experience, and you also don't want to give this impression that their feelings aren't that big of a deal. You also don't want to propose that everything will be fine, because maybe everything won't be fine. But you do want to point out their strengths. And for me, as a couples therapist, it's not hard for me to see strengths in couples, because I usually will see strengths right away. Devin says, I wonder what Dr. Kirk thinks about a couples therapist saying, you don't have to stay in this relationship, right? My couples therapist, who has helped us immensely, has a tendency to say this when I say that I have no idea how to deal with my fiance's hypervigilance and paranoia. It makes me feel a little icky when she says this, because we are nowhere near breaking up. Okay, so again, we have a situation where a therapist is saying something that the client doesn't like. It sounds like the client, Devin, really enjoys the therapy with the therapist, but there's something that the therapist says that kind of annoys them. And that statement is, you don't have to stay in this relationship, right? Okay, so why would a therapist say that sort of thing? Hard to know. The first thing I'll say is, feel free to just tell your therapist, I don't like it when you say that. As a therapist myself, we're trying our best. We're every second of the session, we are thinking, provide a good service, be helpful, do what is right, try to, help them, give them what, let's get them to their goals. And we're very, very invested, generally speaking. And so if we do something that annoys you, even slightly, we really want to know about it. And we are trained to be able to react well to that. So it's not like you're talking to some cashier and you're giving them feedback, because the cashier might not be trained or have the value of taking feedback. Therapists are trained to take feedback well. And if it hurts our feelings, we go to our therapist or our supervisors and we talk with them about it. We don't blast you for it. We're supposed to say, thank you for telling me. Let's work on it. I'm so glad you told me. That's wonderful that you did that. It takes a lot of vulnerability to tell me, a lot of strength. I hear you. Let's work on that. I'm going to try to change. So go ahead and just tell your therapist, I don't like it when you say that. So you're saying, but why would a therapist say, you don't have to stay in this relationship, right? Well, I don't know why a therapist would say that particularly, but if I was to take a guess, I might think that the therapist is saying, so let's see, Devin is saying they're talking with their therapist and saying, I have no idea how to deal with my fiance's hypervigilance and paranoia. Okay, so the client is upset at their fiance and saying, I can't really deal with this person. They really are concerning to me. They're hypervigilant and paranoid all the time, and it impacts me and it hurts me and it scares me. And then the therapist says, well, you don't have to stay in the relationship, right? So just a wild guess, because I'd have to see it in the moment and particularly talk to the therapist. But I would imagine a therapist might say that as a way of getting someone off of a certain train track, meaning that some people are in therapy, they can get really railroaded into a particular mode where they're perhaps complaining about their fiance. Instead of differentiatingly looking at the situation, you can be in your feelings and you could be upset and you could say, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this. But at some point you have to zoom out a little bit and say like, okay, well, how do I contextualize these feelings? Does this mean I want to leave them? Does this mean I just need to put up with it? Does this mean take the good with the bad? Does this mean I need to talk with them about it? What does this mean? And the therapist might be saying that as a way of saying, wow, they're really this client's really complaining. And then the therapist says, you don't have to stay in the relationship. You have the freedom to leave or to stay, meaning your hands are on the wheel. You're not completely powerless in the situation. And so what do you want to do about it? Maybe that's the reason why the therapist says that. Now, again, if I had a trainee that did that, I would pull them aside and say, why would you say that? It didn't seem like that was a relevant question to ask in that moment. And if the therapist said, well, that's, I was saying it because I was trying to get the client to zoom out a little bit, I'd say, well, there are other ways to say that. You could say something like, okay, I'm hearing you complain a lot about your fiance. What does this all mean? I'm curious. I'm listening to you, and I'm concerned, and I agree with you. It sounds very difficult. What does this mean? How can I help you in this moment? Or when you think about the feelings you're having, what do you think? That sort of reflection upon your reflection can sometimes, anyway. But it's hard to know. But in general, people, if your therapist says something that bothers you, just tell them. Say, I don't like that. Most clients never say anything to their therapist along these lines, and it is a big, big mistake because it's your time. You're paying for a service, and if there's something about it that isn't helpful to you, then your therapist absolutely wants to know that, and you're only harming yourself by not saying something. I get that it is scary, and that's part of the therapy sometimes because we perhaps were oppressed by our parents and we're allowed to give them feedback, but what a wonderful opportunity for growth to be able to say something like, hey, I don't like what you're doing. I like 99% of what you're doing. I don't like that. Kalani in Asuelu, another video, Yvette says, wow, this reminds me of my dad. So I think this is the mom, Asuelu's mom. Wow, this reminds me of my dad. He immigrated to the United States, and he would send his family almost all his earnings. He met my mom, and they got married. After the marriage, he stopped sending money, and his family cut off communication with him because of that. I never knew my other grandparents or any of my 20-plus cousins. Wow, that sounds really difficult. Yeah, that does sound very similar to what's happening with Asuelu and his family. Hope says, I have to give it up to Asuelu. He controls himself in a respectful manner. I do think it's easier for him to speak in his own language. Maybe the immaturity is related to the language barrier. Total speculation. But bravo to Asuelu, and Tammy, go home. Yeah, this is something that we all have to keep in mind when we're watching these shows, is for a lot of these individuals, they are speaking not in their native language and will either come across as childish because we have this heuristic that when someone's struggling with language, we think of them as children or as not intelligent or as being ridiculous. It's just this heuristic that we have. And unless you're used to combating that shortcut in our mind, then you will likely have a bias against people who don't have a fluent grasp on the language that you're fluent with. The other thing is that when people are fighting and you're trying to fight in another language, it could make it a lot harder. I mean, your brain, it's already hard to fight, right? And if you're speaking your native language, it's already hard to fight. Your brain is working overtime. Then add this element of trying to find the right words. And fighting usually requires a lot of nuanced communication. And if you have trouble with that, which would make sense, then it's going to be hard. And you're more likely to misinterpret things, that sort of thing. Okay, Elizabeth and Andre videos. This is when Jen was asking Libby to lie. Elle says, Jen has double standards. When Andre didn't tell them about his past, she was calling him a liar and a manipulator. But if it's her idea to lie by omission, then it's not a lie or manipulation. Yeah, Elizabeth and Andre video, the fight with Charlie, where the refrigerator situation. Willie says, I don't know why, but Dr. Kirk keeping a straight face while these adult men insult each other like teenagers is so funny to me. Yeah, sometimes when I edit the video, I'm sort of marveling at how straight my face is, but I think I'm just so intently watching that I'm just, yeah. I think I have resting robot face. I don't know. Linda says, you're always supposed to take off the doors when discarding a fridge or freezer as a safety measure so kids don't get trapped inside and suffocate. Yeah, absolutely. But one, if you're throwing, okay, so even my wife said that. She's like, you have to take the doors off so children don't suffocate. If you're demoing a house, you're taking the fridge and you're probably disposing of it right away. So the chance of a child trapping themselves in is probably so small that it's not necessarily worth taking off the doors. The other thing is you don't have to bash the doors off with a hammer. You can unscrew them. There is one screw. Take the door off, no problem. Bao says, LOL, I was thinking the same thing about the fridge doors. If you need to remove the fridge doors, why not unscrew them, right? Also, I'd be careful pummeling a fridge with a sledgehammer. They contain coolant, which may not be healthy to be exposed to. Yes, that's another reason. Elizabeth and Andre boat fight. So we're getting closer to more recent episodes. Queen Oblivia says, being stuck on a small boat in the middle of the ocean with this family is literally my nightmare. I think I'd take my chances with the sharks. That's a good one, Queen. Embellished says, my theory, the siblings view Andre as Libby 2.0. All the things they are saying to Andre are really the things they have always wanted to say to Libby. Embellished, that is very smart. I think I will add that to my list of hypotheses. That's very smart. Prince Harry video, I published his interview with Oprah in that special that they made regarding mental health awareness, which I found to be really amazing. Chanel says, another way I like normalizing our response to trauma is you're having a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. Yes, I agree, Chanel. I will say that to clients too. It's very powerful, actually, because clients will notice, people will notice that they're having difficulty in their relationships or with their emotions, and they recognize sometimes they're like, there's something different about me, or I'm struggling. Like other people don't struggle this way. And they will shame themselves. And what I'll say is you're having a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. You're having a normal reaction today. When you were 5 years old and that was how you coped with things, that was a normal reaction to a very screwed up situation that you were in and not your fault. The problem is you've retained that way of dealing with your emotions and with relationships into your adult life where it doesn't apply anymore. And that can be a very non-stigmatizing way of looking, because people usually look at themselves and say, well, I'm broken. There's something wrong with me. It's like, no, you're not broken. You're actually quite well functioning, but the approach that your emotions and your assumptions about the world applied when you were 0 through 15, but don't apply anymore. And so we have to rework that. Liz says, unrelated, but I want you to know I have listened to your Funny Feeling cover of Bo Burnham at least 20 times in the last day. My son almost fell asleep in the car when I was playing it. He said your voice is so soothing. Thanks, Shoulder Angel. Well, that's great. Thanks for that. Yeah, I felt a little shy about publishing on YouTube me singing because I don't usually do that, and I probably won't do it very often, if at all, but it was nice that people were being nice. And but you also say you're thinking, and I think you're calling me shoulder angel. That's great. I like that. Shoulder angel. It has a better ring to it than internet daddy. Sometimes people call me YouTube daddy. Angela and Michael video. This is from last week where Angela's asking someone to spy on Michael's phone. Brenda says, I'm having a hard time watching Angela. I understand she is hurting and lashing out in insecurity, but it is abusive. If the sexes were reversed, this would not be allowed at all. Yes, agreed. Tay's Tings, good old Tay, says, it's funny that he said she has, so I said that she has a Jerry Springer mode, because she was on Maury for a Jerry Springer-like episode a long time ago. I think someone might have emailed that to me, but it's interesting to think that she was on Jerry Springer, because she definitely has what I would call a Jerry Springer mode, where it's just like, in your face, pointing finger, saying whatever you can possibly say to somehow win, quote unquote. Logic says, I keep hearing how people like Angela, because she tells it like, I keep hearing how people like Angela because she tells it like it is. Baloney. She's abusive. She's delusional, and she is mean. Kins says, she's abusive. He is standing up for himself and setting boundaries, and abusers don't like that. Agreed. Good old Lizzie says, Your big dog, small dog analogy is perfect. I work in a vet, and the Chihuahuas are always the ones that bite the hardest. Abby says, this always reminds me of how my mom used to be watching Angela. She would be fine and jovial one minute, and then the next she would enter what I called the blackout rage state. It was like she was a completely out of control person and was a totally different person. I'm sorry you went through that, Abby. That sounds awful. Mike and Natalie, they got into a fight last week, right? Feisty says, Mike and Natalie seem to be stuck in an argument loop over and over. They seem miserable. Yes, agreed, Feisty. Megan says, Mike stopped loving Natalie when she threw the ring at him. He didn't look at her the same after that. He didn't entertain her feelings the same after that. You could tell he was done. She thought she could fix it by getting her visa approved and hopping on a plane, but by then it was too late. If COVID hadn't happened, these two would not have been married. Interesting narrative, Megan, certainly possible. My take on it is that Mike, I think it wasn't black or white for him. I think he was very much in love with her. Then they started fighting, then the ring toss. And that definitely brought him down a notch. But I still think he had some hope down there. I think he was hoping. But I think the fact that after that moment, they were both hurt by the other and both scared to be vulnerable. And that's what has led to a downward spiral of avoiding, hurting, avoiding, that now we have the blow up of the fights, which is common in that kind of style of relationship where people avoid, and they just sweep things under the rug. Often they will have a huge blow up and then back to avoid. So I wouldn't be surprised if this next episode we see a lot more avoiding, but who knows? I still hold out for them to go back to that therapist. Remember that therapist they went to? It seemed like it was, Mike was having trouble with it, but it seemed like it could have worked. But, it's just so typical of the show. They go to one therapy session and think that that's going to solve everything. I mean, the couples that I work with for years. Couples therapy takes a long time because not only are you working on the couple's issues, but you're also working on their individual issues as well. So, it's a lot more complicated for me, often than individual therapy, because with individual therapy, it's just one person, and that can take years too. So couples therapy takes a long time. Big Ed episode where they had the kiss. Sharp says, I hate him petting her and saying, I have a girlfriend. It's just another indicator to me that he sees girlfriends as pets more than people on a subconscious level. Right. That's one way of putting it, that he sees women as pets. But another way of putting it is that he is so desperate for relationships, while at the same time because everyone is, but at the same time and this is total speculation, at the same time believing that he doesn't deserve relationships or people won't love him, that he upholds this idea that in order for me to be in a relationship with someone, I have to be of use to them as a superior. I have to be protective. I have to save them. I have to give them money and gifts and shower them with compliments. And so I think that's the dynamic that we're seeing. Again, I can't know that. I would have to ask him. So instead of, because people will often on the internet see it as he's manipulating women, and certainly he might consciously know that, but usually that's not the case. Listen to my whole episode on love bombing, by the way. And I have a follow-up coming up to it as well. That's for patrons only. So, by the way, just little plugs while we're at it, is become a patron of the podcast. That's how we know that you like what we're doing. And for all of you who have become patrons, thank you so much. It's really wonderful whenever we get an email and say, so-and-so became a patron. So that'd be great. And if you could if you are a YouTuber, if you could let me know what your name on YouTube is, it would help me to know. Or honestly, in your comments, here's the thing. In your comments, if you say, I'm a patron, your comment will be more likely reacted to, I think. I don't know. The Podwife puts all this list together. The other thing you can get, of course, is this shirt, along with lots of other shirts and mugs, by using the link below to get merch. Another thing I want to say is we are coming up on our 13th anniversary. You might have heard me talk about it before, but we are having it on August 7th from 10 a.m. Seattle time until 11 p.m. So it's 13 hours straight of YouTube Live. And if you want to send us a card or a gift to open on air during that time, you can send it to 10002, so 10002, Aurora Avenue North, Suite 36, number 214, Seattle, Washington, 98133-9334. And we would love to get a card from you or a little token if you want to send something. Barbara, or a painting, like just a drawing, fan art. Oh, fan art. I am a fan of your fan art. I cannot tell you. I have a folder on my computer with all your fan art, and I just look at it. I have fan art behind me. You might be able to see, I think maybe that right there. You can't really see it, but when I get fan art, I love it. It just really makes my day. I can't really tell you exactly why, but anyway, I think it's the idea that someone spent the time. Obviously, it's very touching to me, but also the style of it's almost like I'm seeing, the podcast through your eyes, because you're doing art, and it's like, oh, that's how you see the thing. And also I get the sense of the tactile nature of what you created, and I don't know, it just feels like I'm connected to y'all. Anyway, Barbara says, so this is about Big Ed. Barbara says, you asked about his marriage. Well, he cheated on his wife while she was pregnant. I think I remember that detail. I forgot that. He's just not a very nice person when it comes to women. He doesn't even treat his daughter very well. Yeah, I think that's interesting that we've been seeing his relationship with his daughter is also strained, because I don't think we noticed that much. Well, I guess we kind of did. Anyway, Real Housewives video from last week. For Micah Forever says, when Sutton continues to deny being racist and gets upset, it reminds me of people who are triggered because they know they have or are doing something wrong and try to deflect by overreacting to the question. Her overreacting, when Sutton overreacts, it just seems like a person who is trying really hard to deny being what she is instead of listening to others and having empathy or growing. Yeah, it's possible that Sutton is doing that. I think Sutton also is just a fragile individual. Not that she's weak or something, but I think she has a lot more traumas than others that are at least more easily triggered while she's on the show. She's very, very quick to have distress and to be hurt. And when you're hurt and you become undifferentiated, it's hard for you to control your emotions and you get defensive. And I think that's where she's coming from. obviously privilege and racism is an element there for sure. And I think what I was speculating for Sutton is she just doesn't know that much. When you take someone who knows nothing about white privilege, you take a white person in the United States who knows nothing about white privilege. They didn't go to college to study those kinds of things, or they're not around people they don't watch YouTube videos about those kind of things. And you say, hey, you're racist or you have white privilege, the very first reaction that people will have typically, and I think it's understandable given their level of ignorance, is I'm not racist. I treat everyone, the same, and I don't have privilege. I don't know what you're talking, because they just don't know. That's actually an element of privilege. You don't have to know, because you can exist in the world and have everything go well for you, and you don't have to study racism. You don't have to understand other people's perspective, because your culture is the mainstream culture. You don't have to adjust. Everyone has to adjust to the mainstream white culture. Now, you could absolutely say white people are responsible for seeking out information about their white privilege, and if they don't, that doesn't absolve them from the guilt of not knowing. They should probably by now understand that there's a thing called white privilege and that racism is a thing, and they should actually do their work to figure out how they can understand things better, understand other people's experience. They shouldn't just sit and wait for things to happen to them. So you could certainly accuse Sutton of not doing enough of that. It's hard to say from the show because we don't know, but it certainly seems like that's a possibility. But I am curious to see how that works out. When I see people, particularly on Real Housewives, talking about, especially when they're talking to Sutton, as you can tell when I'm reacting, I have so many things I would wish I could be there and help Sutton with, because I trust that Sutton can understand, but I feel like it needs to be explained to her in a way that she can get. And I'm not sure if that's happening or not, and I'm worried that that's going to blow up at some point. But anyway, fun question. So me and Berto did an episode yesterday where we just answered fun questions from emails and from Discord. By the way, if you want to join the Discord, I often will ask for questions. Actually, I posted on YouTube. Anyway, wait, fun questions. Where were the fun questions? I think they were from Discord. Hey, DH says, my friend, and I was talking about Cameo when I do cameos for people. DH says, my friend got me a cameo from Kirk wishing our cats a happy birthday. That was very sweet. Yeah, I loved that one. That was really great. Giving cats a happy birthday. Lisa says, my son got me a cameo from Kirk for my birthday. Kirk misunderstood what my son was asking for, but that actually made the message much more interesting. If Berto was on Cameo, I would ask him for career advice. If Berto was on Cameo, I think he would do really well. Yeah, so I will misunderstand. So the way, if you don't know, Cameo works like Twitter in that you only have a certain amount of characters that you can type to request me. So I will read the request, and it's usually pretty condensed down. And if someone gets into something on the request and I can't go back and forth with the person, I'm just doing my best to try to figure out what they're saying. And sometimes I'm like, I think I understand what they're asking me to do. I don't know. And I just take a guess. The other problem is that people have names that I can't pronounce. I'm guessing 99% of the names on the planet I'm going to have a hard time pronouncing because I'm in my little cultural pocket. And that also is very hard. People won't provide pronunciations. They'll just throw this, series of consonants and vowels, and I'm like, how do I pronounce that? So sometimes I just give it a shot. And one person the other day was so angry at me for mispronouncing someone's name. I think that's why they were angry at me. And they gave me a really bad review on Cameo. and so actually I have a rep that I can contact at Cameo. And I said, can you just refund their money? Because I don't know what I did, but I gave them my best shot, and apparently I did it wrong. So that was a bummer. So if any of y'all do cameos, please include as much information as you think I need, like how to pronounce a name. Also, gender is also a thing because, I actually will ask people, can you please provide the gender of the person? Because that's a thing, of course. I can't know, even if a name's, Patricia, I don't necessarily know the gender of the person. Anyway, so, but having said all that, Cameo is a wonderful time for me to give back to y'all. And, if you want to do it, that's fine. And it's fun for me. I actually will for Umberto, I got him a cameo of a Tom Cruise impersonator. So that was fun. And one of my friends got me a cameo from a football player who is half Asian that I like, who plays for the LA Rams. Anyway, Cameo's fun. It's a fun way to give a gift to someone, regardless of if you do my thing or not. Well, anyway, all right, people, it's been fun. It's real hot. It's hot in Seattle, but I know it's real hot around the country right now. So stay cool and relax and know your needs, know your temperature needs, assert that, do what you got to do. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.